All right, in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome. My name's McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of our local independent bookstore live stream. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. We would not be here without you the last year, the last 50 years, without your support. And that's true. Tattered Cover has now been around for 50 years. It is our 50th anniversary in 2021, which is very exciting and a tremendous feat for a bookstore. But we owe it to you, our viewers, our loyalty program members, our customers, our patrons. Thank you for supporting us throughout this time. It's because of you that we're able to bring authors like the ones that we have tonight and amazing events that we have lined up. For those of you who may be joining us who are outside of the Colorado area, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore with 4 locations in the Denver metro area, soon to be 5, which is very exciting. We're opening up our new Stanley Marketplace all children's location sometime later in the summer. And then just for those of you who might not know yet, our Lodo store is moving to the brand new McGregor Square, and that is happening later in late May, early June, which we're very excited for. So we have 3 stores currently open, and you can still come visit us as long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, and you can come shop and browse with us for about 90 minutes or so. But our website is open 24/7. So tattercover.com can fulfill all your bookish needs if you want to stay shopping in your pajamas or you live out of state. We would be happy to ship wonderful indie picked books for you. Also, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar down at the bottom of your screen with a button labeled CC on it. You click that button, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. Also, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of our author talk here. And so there's a chat next to the screen that you're watching us on. So if you sign into that chat, you can ask all the questions to your heart's content. Additionally, there are so many upcoming events. I'm serious, there's a lot of upcoming events. So you need to be checking on our social media. You need to sign up for our email newsletter to make sure that you're up to date on all of those events. And you can check out the full calendar at tattercover.com/event. Now, I'm personally very excited for the authors that we have here tonight. We are celebrating The Girl in His Shadow by Audrey Blake, who is really Regina Sirois and Jaima Fixsen. And so we're so excited to talk to these authors today about their newest book, The Girl in His Shadow. And I am going to welcome both Regina and Jaima to the screen so that we can talk about this book and all things writing. So welcome, Regina and Jaima. Hi, ladies. Just unmute you here.
Hello.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. Oh, thank you for being here at Tattered Cover. We're so elated to have you here with us. I'm just really grateful to have these wonderful authors. So I'm excited to talk about your latest book. Would one of you or both of you start us off with a little bit of a summary about The Girl in His Shadow, just so we know what we're talking about?
I can do that. The Girl in His Shadow is about a woman who believes in scientific medicine and believes that she has a contribution to make to scientific medicine back in a time when, the world didn't believe that women had much of a contribution in anything. So it's, about a struggle to learn and to be, and when faced with choices about whether your work should be noticed or not, whether it's worth advancing a cause when it can cost you a lot yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the great things about it, is that there's this certain level of intrigue and questioning of morality and what do you do for yourself, and what is truth, and we don't necessarily know it all in a historical novel in this way. And I'm curious where this idea came to you. Did one of you get it first? Did you both collaborate on it? How did the muse strike you?
Well, I think it started with me, but the way a seed starts with something, and it's very different than what it turns into. So I happen to study history. That was my major, and I'm a student of history always. That's what I'm always reading at all times, is nonfiction history. And I came across some essays about American medical students in Paris in the Victorian times. And I was so blown away and intrigued with the stories. These men would carry livers home under their top hats because it was illegal to do these dissections. It was illegal to have these organs. So the only way they could learn about the body was to like sneak the organs back to their apartments and work on them. And anyway, for some reason, it set a fire off in my brain, and I wanted to know more. And I started studying surgeons of the day, biographies of surgeons of the day, which took me into the field of discovering anesthesia. How did we discover anesthesia? And aren't we glad we did? And so anyway, I went to Jaima and I told her about all these things I had been reading. And Jaima reads everything all the time. She's a walking encyclopedia. So she, of course, was like, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I've read things like that. And I said, Jaima, I feel like there's an amazing story in there, but I also feel like there's a decade worth of research to do it justice. I don't feel like I could do it on my own. And she was like, well, let's do it together. And that's exactly, and we literally that day, she happened to be in town from Canada, in Kansas, and we sat down and we're like, let's map it out. And that's exactly, we just committed that day and we started the journey.
Sorry, I was muted, and because we have a surrounding noise, and so I mute myself when I'm not talking. But wow, that's so cool. And so, what is it like writing together? You know what I mean? And Regina, I'd love to talk to you about that feeling that you had of like, I can't necessarily do this on your own. So how did you know Jaima was the right person to work on this project with you?
Well, I had known Jaima for many years, and she was the only other author that I would let see my work before I took it anywhere. And I was the one who sent it to Jaima and I said, this is the best I can do, fix it. Tell me what I need to do to make it magical and fix it. And she always knew how. She is this big picture brain, and she could say, it's right here, Regina, you're doing a great job, fix this little spot right here and it's going to just take off. And she was always right. So she writes historical fiction, and she is like the queen of London in this time period, and England, and really actually other countries in Europe too. So I thought, she's already got that. No, it's so true. So I'm like, she's got that down. So I wouldn't have to like learn what clothes they were wearing, right? Jaima would know. I'd be like, Jaima, what's he wearing? And she would know. I could completely devote myself to the medical research, which is really pretty much what I did. Jaima already knew what was happening in that time period in society, so we could really concentrate on what was happening in medical science and what were they doing at the time.
And Jaima, can you talk about your response when being approached with this project by Regina? And I know you were probably blushing at all the compliments that she was giving you, but it's true, you do have a great history when it comes to those Victorian era books. So what was it like receiving this project, and what was your reaction to it?
Regina is so fun to be around, and she has so much fire and a passion for writing, and she's such a gifted word painter. So when we started becoming critique partners, which predated our project like several years, I would send my stuff to her and she'd be like, yeah, this is like a great story, but I need the feels, Jaima. And she's so good at emotional intensity and beautiful words. And so we'd been working together for years, and I already had seen how I'd grown as a writer because of our collaboration. And so this was kind of just like the next step was, let's write a book together that would actually be our book, instead of you helping me with my book and me helping you with yours. So I was really excited about it. I did have one misgiving. So when Regina said, like, I think we should write this book together, and I said, okay, but not in first person. So like that was my one hesitation, and she was just so nice about it.
Well, so we've talked about how, well, we think that writers, it's kind of like being right-handed or left-handed. If you gravitate toward first person or third person, there's just your natural propensity. I have a natural propensity, and every other novel I'd written was in first person, and that's my natural propensity. So Jaima taught me to be ambidextrous. It's really awesome. So it was my first foray. I felt like I was kind of learning a foreign language. It wasn't my natural place to be, but it fell into place really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What other friend would do that for someone else? Like, no, I'm just gonna like tie my right hand behind my back and do it.
But that's also very interesting. You talk about the left-handed and right-handed, but before we went live, we were talking about right-brained versus left-brained, and how there's also there's a positives and negatives, obviously, to having these dual perspectives in novel writing. So can both of you talk about your experiences with writing with somebody else in this collaborative way that is known for being a solitary art often?
I think it's magical. So what I love is that we both came to it having written several books on our own. So we knew what that process was. We had kind of tested ourselves in those waters. And what was magical was that all of a sudden, something that had always been deeply introspective, personal, suddenly you could share the burden. Suddenly, when you hit writer's block, someone else just picked up the block and moved it for you. Like literally, I would say, Jaima, I'm stuck in the middle of the scene. I was going on great, and then nothing. I hit a wall, and she's like, well, hold on, let me just knock that wall down for you and finish the scene. So it was magical. It was like my brain doubled overnight, and my power to produce something doubled overnight when we joined forces.
How about for you, Jaima?
Oh, absolutely. It went from being like a marathon to being a relay.
I like that analogy. That's a really great analogy for that. And there's a certain sharing of the burden that comes with it. I'm curious about voice. You know, when you're writing one book with two people, what kind of lessons in voice did you learn throughout this process?
I wish I could like kind of explain how that happened, but it was natural. It's
Okay.
the way like when you are friends with someone and you start to talk like each other and you mirror each other's habits, and you like that just happened as we combined characters. I think like I could not, to this day, in fact, just today, I had somebody ask me, oh, tell me one of the chapters that's yours. I just got my copy. And I just started laughing. I'm like, there isn't a single one. I couldn't tell you a single sentence. Every sentence is half Jaima and half me. So yeah.
And that's how you know it's a real collaboration in that way too, because there's a lot of books that we read by two authors that take place like two different characters, and they each take a chapter, they each take a character, you know, and it goes that way. But
which
this
is really tidy. And I think that must be really efficient.
Well, I mean, I have to say though,
yeah.
No, but that's what's a true. It's why I was very fascinated about this idea of voice, because you know each author, they talk a lot about the A-Bing classes and other advice that about finding your own voice, and in this way, you two had to blend your voices to find one voice. And so I'm curious, Jaima, did you learn anything from that process, or did you find that it was also very natural, as Regina described?
It felt really natural. And, you know, we both have like words and syntax that we use that's idiosyncratic to us. And I think sometimes as we'd be revising, when we'd hit one of those things that, you know, just sounded not like us, we'd kind of just blend it till it was in the middle. So when my mom read the book, she's like, yeah, I don't know where you wrote and where Regina wrote, except maybe sometimes I hear like there's like one or two words that I'm like, yeah, that's a Jaima word. Because we all have our own
what are some
use.
Jaima words? Can you give us some examples? What are some Jaima words and what are some Regina
Regina.
words?
Yeah, can I give you some examples? The Jaima words are the words you have to get out the dictionary and look them up, and then you're like, oh, how fun, I just learned a new word. Those are the Jaima words. And that's her regular vocabulary. She walks around like with this higher level vocabulary. And sometimes I like call her out. I'm like, Jaima, I love learning your new words. I don't think anyone's going to know that one. I'm so sorry.
That is true. That does happen.
And Jaima, what are some Regina words?
Pretty. Anything that's pretty in the book that gives you the chills. They're like, oh, I have felt that. That is Regina.
Oh man, but that's such an interesting combination that both of you have said that. Again, it gets like left brain, right brain, and right-handed, left-handed of like Regina's got these really erudite words that are highbrow, you have to look it up in a dictionary, and whereas Regina's got these ones that just hit you in the gut and hit you with your heartstrings. What a great combination that you two have been able to find in that. That's awesome. I want to dive.
Go ahead. Like we both kind of fill in each other's deficits.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think Regina, you said something about filling each other's holes earlier and before we started live too. Does that feel right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There are things that I can do as a writer now that I could not do before I met Jaima and worked with her over the years. Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. I love hearing that.
For me as well.
Aw. I want to talk a little bit about writing women in this time period, and especially Nora is such an ambitious, smart, driven woman, wanting to do right by the patients and everything. So what is it like writing about women in this time period when there are so many restrictions on them? And can you talk a little bit more about that process and how that worked for you? And not Regina, I'm so sorry. Jaima, maybe you could start having written in this time period previously.
I really love history. I love especially the history of science, and I kind of see it as like the history of human awareness. So it's just so exciting when as a species we discover something that changes the way we see the world and it changes the things we can do. And but it's especially interesting to write about women in history because half the time they're not even there. Like they were there, they had to be, but they're just not there. And so it's so fascinating to me to imagine like what were they like. And the women then were obviously as intelligent and gifted and ambitious and as women today are now, but how did they find ways to exercise that ambition, and what workarounds did they do? And so Nora's a composite of different women from history. So discovering the women and the ways that they found to achieve their ambitions and achieve their goals and find meaning and purpose in their lives, it's so inspiring. Like it just kind of, as far as food for the imagination, it's delicious and engrossing.
How about you, Regina? What was the process like for you of writing about women in this time period, especially one so ambitious under such restriction?
Yeah, well, sometimes it's sad. Sometimes it's sad because you get to know them and you see these limitations that just shouldn't have been. And so sometimes it can actually get you in the heart. For me, it's really important to write history as it would have been then, and not to treat it like another culture and not come in from everything we have and know today and impose that judgment on them then. And that's incredibly important to me, that you go and respect the fact that they were where they were and they knew what they knew. And that's what we're working with. We're not working with today and going back and judging and trying to rewrite it all as we wish it had been, because I do wish it had been different in a lot of situations. I think to truly honor people in the past, you admit what they had to work with and show what they did with that. And I think that honors them a lot.
That's a great way of saying it too. And also in the way of honoring the past. And Regina, you spoke a little about this earlier and about research, right? So what research did you do? You talked about how excited you were, but what research did you do? And then Jaima, I'd love to ask a similar question too, of what research did you do in order to honor that time period as best you could? Like you talked about biographies and stuff. Could you give us maybe some titles that were there or anything that helped you?
Yes, absolutely. I'll leave some of the titles for Jaima to give to. I love David McCullough. I loved his essays in The Greater Journey. That's what started all of this for me. Those are some of my favorites. And The Blessed Days of Anesthesia. That is the book that just sent me right over the edge. And I'm like, there's no return. I have to dive into this world. And it was about the discovery of ether and chloroform. And it's amazing. And for us, I think the process was to read everything that we could find that other historians had written. And then we had to go past that and we needed some primary sources. And so we have spent years reading medical journals from London, written between 1840 and 1848. And that is how we have spent a lot of our time combing through the medical journals and reading the case studies and watching the patients be served mercury and then arsenic and then a little more mercury. And then at the end, they're like, we just don't know why they died. And you're just watching, you're like, no, please don't give that man mercury anymore. So we have been primary sources for years now, studying up on all of these cases that we could find.
Wow, I don't know, there's kind of a sense of humor in that. There's some kind of joke somewhere too. I mean, again, like you said, it is a little sad, but there's something like, oh no, wait, no, leeches don't work, I promise.
Actually, Michaeli, if I can just put a plug in for leeches, they were like the best thing they came up with. That's probably the safest thing that any doctor did in 1845. You just wanted them to say, I think you need a leech. That's like...
Wait, I want that though, like I want that on like a bumper sticker or a t-shirt of, can I make a case for leeches, please? That's the greatest line. There's a great podcast called Sawbones that talks about like the history of medical blunders and things that have gone wrong. And it makes me think of that. That's so funny. I mentioned leeches because it was the one I knew, but that's hilarious. Oh my God, the lesser of two evils. Jaima, what was the research like for you? And what are some of the titles that inspired you?
Stephen Johnson's The Ghost Map about cholera, it's the start of modern epidemiology right there, and still pertinent to us in days of a pandemic. The Knife Man by Wendy Moore. I've also recently been reading her No Man's Land, so not related to our book, but it's about the female physicians and surgeons in the Great War, which is so good. Blessed Days of Anesthesia. What else did we read? A lot of articles. I think our favorite journal from the time would be the Provincial Medical and Surgical Journal. And then,
yes,
but those are the ones that stuck with me the most, that just, they're nonfiction titles, but like total nail biters. Oh, and The Knife Man. Did I mention The Knife Man?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
No, that's awesome. But you mentioned pandemic, right? And so I'm curious too about what was it like working together in the pandemic, and also, I'm not gonna lie, was it hard reading all those medical journals with what was going on in our world at the moment? Because like I could only consume romance novels. That was about it. Like I was like happily ever afters, that was it. But like how did the pandemic affect your process and this partnership?
I totally switched to romance novels. So most of the research was done before the pandemic, thankfully. Like I really did not anticipate in a million years that this would have happened, that our book featuring a pandemic would come out in the middle of one. But anyways, so yeah, I totally switched to romance novels. We had planned to go to Bologna to research the sequel last February, right when things started to get really bad in Italy. So obviously we didn't get to go. So we had to make do with whatever the internet and our libraries would provide. So I still get a little bit sad about that. And I really hope we make it there someday, because what an incredible institution, and the legacy of female scholarship there is truly incredible, and the world should know more about it.
Yeah. Can you, Regina, I want to definitely follow up on that, on the first question, but Jaima, can you talk a little bit more about that for people who might not know the significance of Bologna?
Okay.
And, yeah.
The University of Bologna had many well-known, famous women academics were there working in the 1700s. In the 1800s, they were still training women as surgeons, as lecturers. You know, it wasn't, there were fewer than in the 1700s, but it was there. It was a place where Anna Manzolini was an anatomist and wax modeler. She taught medical students. She toured Europe because she was so famous, her model. So it was one of those places where women had a chance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. There was just a question of like, what does that have to, you know? So, and then Regina.
So in our second book, Bologna comes into play, but that's not in the first book.
Yes, I think that's where the confusion was a little bit of like, wait a second, why is that important? But in book 2, it will be. So Regina, going back to the pandemic, how did that affect your process and your side of the partnership?
Well, it affected me because I became a homeschool mom. And so not only just
God
a virtual school mom, but I started... Thank you. So I actually had to scramble and learn how to come up with curriculum and how to teach every middle school subject that there is. And so, and I also had these commitments to Jaima and to me and to our project. So what happened is I got up at 5:30 in the morning and I would write for 2.5 hours until my daughter came downstairs to the kitchen, and then we would do school. And then we'd stop at lunchtime, and then Jaima and I would work in the afternoons together. So it was physically a little grueling for me during the pandemic. Like I wore down a little bit. And that trip to Italy would have been very appreciated. I wish that I had been walking the streets of Bologna with Jaima and going to the anatomical wax museum with her. So it was a little tricky. I'd say it's hard right now. Like, we wish we were together right now. We wish we were holding the book together. We wish we were meeting people together and telling them in person. It's really hard to be 2 countries. You know, we're across national borders and we cannot get to each other. So that's been rough.
No, absolutely. And you are not alone. There's a lot of authors, unfortunately, that have had books come out during this pandemic and that are like, I just miss the people. I miss the celebration of having the books. And so we definitely do everything that we can, but we understand 100%, and it's completely valid. And we're still grateful that you were able to produce this wonderful book for us and this story, you know, during this time. And we've got some audience questions here. The last one I want to ask, though, before we turn it over is, can you give us any hints with no spoilers about book 2?
Well, Nora...
Take it away, Regina.
Nora is going to be offered the opportunity to actually study medicine officially. So she is going to be given the chance to step out of these shadows for a while.
Yay! Oh, so exciting. So we've got audience questions. There's a chat next to the screen that you're watching us on that you can ask questions from. And so one of the ones is, where did the name Audrey Blake come from?
Well, Jaima Fixsen and Regina Sirois are really hard to say and spell. So it was a marketing decision to have a pen name. And we chose Audrey Blake because that's the name of Regina's oldest daughter and my oldest son, and they worked well. We tried different combinations of our various kids' names, and Audrey Blake seemed to work the best.
I love that. Do you know Mary Kay Andrews also does that? I had no idea for years that her children were Mary Kay and Andrew. And I was like, oh, what? Right? Shocking. Yeah, that's not her name at all. At all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I love that. The sincerity of putting that in your other greatest achievement into this creative one. That's awesome. Now I'm all endeared. This is a great question too. Regina, you were talking about homeschooling. Did you teach your daughter any of the medical science and history that you learned in your research?
Yeah. So we, as our last unit of science, we did human anatomy. So we studied for every week, we studied a major body system, and it culminated in a dissection of a pig. And she, like, I have the pictures, and she's enamored. Like, she loves it when I call her my little Nora, and she'll always say, like, I just love learning about these things. So she went from a girl who is like all art and ballet and very, very right-brained to suddenly, like, she's seeing the art of the human body, and like she's seeing the poetry and the beauty and the drama of this human body. And she loved it, and it was very exciting to do it together.
Oh, that's awesome. That was such a great question too. This one's specifically for Jaima. Jaima, are there other historical time periods that tickle your fancy? Being the Victorian queen you are, I love that you write in that era, but are there other ones that interest you?
Yes. The classical period. I'm really interested in the Chinese history because it's so epic.
So you might branch out.
Book I wrote, which is like, it takes me a while to like do this. So my first unpublished novel that will never get out of the drawer because it definitely needs to stay there is about, I was writing about the Pythagoreans, which is like this math cult in ancient Greece. So I love science and I love the past, but no time machines, please. I like antibiotics and cell phones.
No. But wait. You're gonna keep that book in a drawer?
It needs to stay in a drawer. It's terrible.
Damn.
Thank you, McKaylee, for understanding that anyone who can say math and cult and put them together, like, needs to be heard by the world. Thank you for recognizing that.
That's a pitch. As a marketing person, like, hello, ancient Greece math cult.
Yeah, I know.
That's easy. Sold. All right. Well, maybe draft like 600. Will come out of the drawer.
That's what it would take. I don't know if I have the stamina for that.
I have to ask this next question, which is also towards Jaima. Jaima, is your wallpaper fairy tale related? And if so, I'm obsessed with it.
I am too. It's like my favorite thing in my house. See, it is fairy tale related. So there's like the woodcutter and Red Riding Hood and Hansel and Gretel.
Nice. That is one thing I will say for virtual events.
I really love fairy tales, as you can tell.
That's awesome. That's one thing I said about virtual events that is really cool, is that we get insights into authors' homes that we never would have before. Like there's your amazing wallpaper, bookshelf tours. Regina's cat walked by earlier before we started recording. There's a certain uniqueness that does come to it, for sure. So another one is, what is the best writing advice you learned from each other?
I can go first on that one. For me, from Jaima, she's taught me so much about pacing and the big picture of the book. She is so good at seeing the book and being able to compartmentalize it into pieces and to like say, this should come way over here and this moves here. And I tend to look at it as one big piece, and I have a hard time pulling out those different components. So she has really taught me about pacing and how to really look at it, as in not letting it get too slow anywhere. She's fantastic at that.
I'd say Regina has really, knowing Regina has taught me to push past that emotional edge and not to be afraid to be descriptive and to, use artistic devices and to really focus on making it beautiful.
I like
and
that.
She excelled at that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a gorgeous book, what you guys have produced, for sure. So this is another great question. How did you decide on the title?
Thank you, McKaylee.
The title
Marketing.
arrived from a stork.
Okay, back up. What?
Well, we had the title that we worked under, and then a little stork came and said, we are delivering the new, better title to you.
And it was great. Choosing titles is my least favorite part.
Yeah, little stork called an editor. Well, for anybody in book world knows that, as much as people like to think of, not necessarily in Jaima and Regina's case, but when creating a book, authors are like at their computer by themselves in a dark room with a glass of scotch or something like that, right? And it's all a lonely process. When that's actually not the case at all. There's, graphic designers and cover artists and editors and agents, and everybody has input into it. And so that often comes with a title selection as well. So a little tidbit.
If I never have to choose another title again, I will be a happy woman.
Is that your least favorite part? Is that your least favorite part? Mm-hmm. Can I ask why?
Okay, I lied. The other least favorite part is writing the author bio. Regina knows.
It's the craziest thing. I keep asking her if I can write it, because if Jaima were to write her bio, she'd be like, Jaima Fixsen lives in Canada. Like, that would be her bio. And she's the most fascinating, qualified person. And I can't, like, if I start to say it, she like turns bright red and she's like, let's change the subject. Let's talk about anything but my author's bio.
It's kind of adorable. I love it. But it's also, it makes sense. You want to focus on the work, and I totally get that. But why is title writing your either first or second most hated thing about the book? I'm just curious.
It's so hard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Like 5 words to describe a book and make it sound interesting.
Well, but again, I find it interesting because, again, I'm a marketing person. So my whole thing is like, can you get it in a tweet? Can you get it in a headline and stuff? And so that's so fascinating as authors, the idea that, yes, of course, you wrote this 90,000 word novel and you're trying to condense it down. That's so, of course, so interesting. So another great question here, we'll do probably 2 more or so before we end, is what media other than the medical journals got you through the pandemic? Any romance novels you want to share, or any other books to recommend?
Helen Huang, her books. I'm probably saying Huang wrong, but she is so funny. I love her dialogue. Like, I just blitzed through each book in a day. It was so fun, and I just needed it.
I'm dying for her 3rd one.
Me too. I cannot wait.
Itching for it. Mm-hmm. And as a woman on the autism spectrum, it was the first time I ever saw myself in literature in the right way, with the KISS quotient, and so good. Yeah. So yeah, amazing. Glad to hear I am not the only fan, as evidenced by her immense popularity. But yeah, Regina, what about you?
So in our house, I am a crazy big fan of children's picture books. Like, I cannot outgrow a good picture book. And I have 2 teenage daughters and my husband, and they still gather up on the bed, all 4 of us at night, for me to read the same storybooks we have been reading since they were children. And like my 18-year-old still crawls up and she's like, "You didn't tell me you were reading this one tonight." And so I cannot grow out of a good picture book ever. I can still hear my father's voice from when I was like 5 or 6 years old saying, caps for sale, 50 cents a cap. I can still, so yeah, I love a good picture book anytime.
Oh, that makes my heart swell. I love it. Love it. Love it. Actually, I'm going to do 2 more questions because this is a good one. Can you talk about writing Dr. Gibson, and what it was like to write his and Nora's relationship?
I loved writing Daniel Gibson, and I love him because I think he is the unsung hero of the book, because he is a person that is a product of his time, and he comes in with all of his preconceived notions, and he's willing to think about it. Like at first, like this whole new world of Nora cutting up a body is not okay. Like that's not okay, and that is not in the realm of what he knows. But I love his quiet character development, and I love his introspection and his ability to just take a new idea. So I loved writing Daniel Gibson, even though he's the least flamboyant of all our characters.
This is true. But Jaima, what was it like for you?
He's you, like Nora said, or like Regina said, he's the least flamboyant, and so we need him. We need him to give ballast to the other people who just would go up here, go up there, and so he's the bread and the sandwich. You can't have a sandwich without bread.
It's true. It's very true.
He's the person that you want to write on the day where you're just feeling like meh, like it's just nice to write a Daniel scene.
It makes me think of like the straight man characters in sitcoms or something, like Arrested Development. There's always like one of them that is like everybody else is crazy and you're the center of it, which now that I'm thinking about it that way, Gibson is that way.
Yeah. We needed him to show how odd this situation was. Like he was the one that really reflects like the huge leap from conventionality that everyone is taking around him. So I actually would laugh as I wrote him, because I'm like, oh, this poor guy, he's in the middle of all kinds of crazy.
Oh, poor Daniel. Well, the last question that we like to ask here at Tattered Cover, and you guys have actually talked a lot and been very wonderfully candid about your process, what you've learned from each other, and what this book did for you. But the question that we like to ask around here is, what did this book, The Girl in His Shadow, teach you? Oh, you both just got really scared.
No.
Tag team. Regina, you want to go first? Or?
Yes, I love that question. That's an incredible question.
Thank you.
The Girl in His Shadow, it taught me about discovery, really, because every single person in this book discovers something. Horace Croft discovers someone that he needed in his life that he didn't know. Daniel discovers a new way to be, and Nora discovers that she has a voice and a place in the world and a talent that's worth pursuing. So for me, it just taught me about being true to the things I discover.
And Jaima?
Probably to be brave. And to to try hard.
Hey, those
if we're gonna write about her, like, and make a story that is deserving of the women that she that inspired us. Like, you know, I have to be brave in my writing and trying to put it out there, and persistent. Like, and I don't think nearly as much is demanded of me as the people that have gone before, or other people that face troubles today.
Mm-hmm. No, I think those are valuable lessons. Those are wonderful lessons. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you both for this delightful conversation. This wonderful friendship that the pair of you have has created this great book, which is The Girl in His Shadow. And you can get your copies at tatteredcover.com. I want to give each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where we can find you online, and anything else that you want to say before we end tonight. And Jaima, you'll go first just because alphabet.
Okay. So I'm half of Audrey Blake, and our book, The Girl in His Shadow, has just come out. You can find it at Tattered Cover. And yeah, thanks for having us, Tattered Cover, Michaela. It's been so delightful to chat with you tonight.
Yes, and if you want to find us on Instagram, or on the web, we are Audrey Blake Books. So you can write to us at Audrey Blake Books. You can look us up, and you can check us out on Instagram. We would love to start a conversation with any of our readers.
Awesome. Well, you guys can certainly do that. And you got to first, though, by starting by reading the book. So get your copy of The Girl in His Shadow at tatteredcover.com. If you two will stick around while I just close this out here. I'm Michaela with Tattered Cover. This has been Audrey Blake, also known as Jaima Fixsen and Regina Sirois. Yep. Regina Sirois. I didn't have it phonetically written in front of me, so I was remembering it. But Regina Sirois and Jaima Fixsen, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading.
Bye all.